Mute. Hello, everybody. Yeah.
What's going on, Alex? I think we've fixed the video. You said it was just a simple toggle, maybe a checkbox.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to update your resume as a Skype master now, an OBS master, whatever other mastery you've kind of unlocked here.
I successfully did a little research. That is correct. And hopefully it's not going to go... It didn't resize the whole time during Guy in a Cube that we were playing with this. So hopefully that means it won't resize this whole time. Today I did not get a haircut. I'm horribly overdue for a haircut. What I did was my hair managed to lay down on its own today, which is miraculous. And yeah, so today we're going to talk about the new object level security settings and compare and contrast with row level security. We might even try mixing and matching, which the documentation says not to do, and I want to find out how not to do it. It is.
Well, let's start out with kind of, if we maybe go back to our previous comparison with analysis services and kind of Power BI Premium and now PPU. If you want to cut over to my screen, we'll talk about that. Awesome. So we might be a little bit blocked here.
I can hide our videos. Now that we got it working, we don't need them anymore.
We need object level security.
Hold on, Alex, would you back up
so that was
to where I hid your video? Because apparently it also hid your audio. Yeah.
Oh. Well, then we'll do a test. We'll rewind the chat wherever they can hear us. If you can hear us, give us the thumbs up in the chat.
Uh-huh.
Awesome. Check. Awesome. Thank you. I'll kind of scratch this. We'll go right back to the beginning here. So whenever we started talking PPU with the announcement, we said, well, why would we go AES? Feature comparison, we kind of came to a stopping point where we said it could be related to the products or the project's requirements of object level security, which Azure Analysis Services or SQL Server Analysis Services did have in their favor, where Power BI only had that row level. Public preview, February 2021, they just barely snuck it in there, kind of that 4 p.m. on a Friday. Now I think we're pretty excited about it. Some of the other features too, in terms of still in the favor of AES, scale out, now available with kind of that public preview of Gen 2 capability with some auto scaling. Today though, concentrating once again on object level security. I have my own questions, kind of reading through the Power BI blog, the process. I was like, well, why can't we just do this in Tabular Editor? Alex, you said you kind of already explored it, maybe some of the sticking points. If you want to pull up your screen, we can start walking through that process, but I'd kind of love to learn here. MS Docs whispers, what are the areas where you really need to kind of watch out for?
Let's take a look and see how it goes. So... I've got a model here. This is a model that I downloaded from the Definitive Guide to DAX, and I made a couple of changes to support a few extra scenarios. So basically, I added a sales ag table that's an aggregate of sales, and I added this forecast table that's just a copy of sales, and this dimension that's a copy of product category. Hopefully we'll get to those later. But basically, this is the same Consoto model you're used to seeing and is in the auxiliary stuff for the Definitive Guide to DAX. That's where we're going to start with. So the first thing we need to do is create a role. And so one of the sort of sticking points, and I think this is why the other day Patrick was saying you need 3 tools, is if you use Tabular Editor, you can't create the roles. So I've got a bunch of roles here and I can edit those no problem. So say I changed this from none to read and hit save. that worked just fine. And I'll just change that back. But if I do new role, demo role here, and I hit save, well, the last time I tried this, it didn't work. So let's look at the roles and see if my demo role showed up, because maybe, yeah, we're not seeing demo role at all here. So, oh no, there it is.
Do you have the blog by chance, Alex? Because my opinion was this should just work,
It
right?
did just work. I don't know why it didn't
Did we
work
see
the other
it?
night. It's right here. Oops, we don't need that. We need zoom in. There we go. Okay, yeah, it worked. So I guess I was wrong. You can use Tabular Editor to create your roles. That's nice.
But that's different than kind of the blog where they was saying, hey, create your roles
Yeah.
first in Power BI Desktop, then jump over to Tabular
Yeah, so the
Editor,
documentation
which
says that what you should do is create your roles in this screen and then just don't do anything over here. That's the first step. And then from there, you're supposed to come in and open up Tabular Editor. And yeah, I agree. There are much fancier versions of this feature, which Christian and I discussed quite a bit actually months ago. And hopefully the much fancier versions will still come. I know they're not on the roadmap, haven't been publicly discussed, but it's easy to see how data masking would be fantastic. And we're going to talk about some alternatives that you can use for data masking. Hopefully, that's what the ag table's there for. But first, let's just get into this. We've got our demo role, and there's a couple things. Oh wait, I need to use Control 4 for live zoom. We can pretty easily create permissions on tables in the role. Or if we go to a table or go to a column, we can down here open up object level security and then create column level read permissions on it. So that is how this works. So let's look at the roles I've already created. So the most basic one is this one where I've just said, hey, users can't read the product category table when they're in this role. And this is where we get to, other than the sort of clunkiness of creating some stuff in Tabular Editor, this is probably the first sort of bummer here, which is I've got this visual right here, which has category, and up across the top, we've got store name. And if we view as our category table role, what we'll see is the visual doesn't render at all. And that's not the best experience. The user doesn't know why it's not working. They don't get, the error message doesn't say, hey, you don't have permission to access this column. It just says it's not working. Yeah, we can raise the volume a bit. Is that better? So that's this role. Let's look at some of the other roles that we've created. Because that's the whole table. We've got another role that is on a column. So this is going to be the customer name column. So down here, this one says, hey, you can't use the customer name. So if we view as customer name, now this doesn't work. And yeah, hold on, that didn't quite do the customer name role, customer, table permissions, column permissions, none. Yeah. So I'm a little confused. Not letting me use. Anyway, so I think I have an extra permission enabled somewhere because it's hiding a table that's not on the roll. Anyway, I guess this is the point, that it gets a bit confusing to manage everything. But ultimately, like, this lets you hide columns. And you can see when I put these roles on that the customer table, the name column here, doesn't show up in the field list at all. You know, if we add this back in, here it is. The company name I was using here was from the customer table. And I guess I must have accidentally hid that with the role too. So that's sort of the basic thing of using OLS. There are some alternatives where you can use RLS to do the same thing. I haven't fully set this up yet, but let's see if we can do it in real time. So here I have this is sort of the basic implementation. Maybe if we view in here, it'll be a little easier to see without manage roles, hide customer. So here, this RLS role just hides the values in the customer table. And this isn't really going to work, right? If I put this role on, it filters the fact table. And so I haven't actually hidden the dimension. I just hidden the fact. But what we can do is use our ag table, which has everything but the store dimension. And we can filter RLS so we can create a new measure that looks something like sales equals calculate, or sorry, var store filtered equals if is filtered. No, we want to use is cross filtered. So is filtered only takes a column as a parameter, but is cross filtered takes a table. So if we use is cross filtered, we can say store, and then if this is filtered, we can say if if store filter, if the store is filtered, then we can do sales amount, and if not, we can do sum of sales ag sales amount. And oh, what did we do wrong here? Extra parentheses. If oh, right. Return result. There we go. So now we have a measure that will dynamically switch between the two tables. And so if I take this and switch this out with my sales amount here, no, I have to actually put the right measure in. And now if I do view as the role again, well, we'll have to use a different role, which I don't think I've set up yet. So now let's just do sales by employee, and on the sales table, we can have this do filter I want to do this in tabular. Let's do this here, where I can get some IntelliSense. I have become completely addicted to IntelliSense. Store employees. This is really what we need here. So let's just pick one employee. It doesn't have employee name. Okay. Employee 7. So filter store, comma. That looks right. So then, yeah, Theo, with false in the role, you just hide the whole table. Like, it's basically just true false. So you can very easily create just like yes, no roles. So here we're filtering on a single employee, but we could use like the same approach. Oh, I have to put it on the right table. Can we just do this? Does this? There we go. So we could just do, I mean, now that we have this, let's just start with false here, and we'll see what happens. So now if we view as our sales by employee role, and we change out our measure here, still using the wrong one, what we'll see is, let me bring in the store name here, and we'll see that it doesn't, let's zoom in here. It still has the store name column, but it hasn't broken the visual. All it's done is it doesn't show anything. And the reason for that is that the store name rows that is cross-filtered. And so your measure switcher selects the one that's been filtered. But when you're in the total row or the continent row here, it doesn't hit that is cross-filtered trigger. And so it hits the ag table, which isn't being filtered by the RLS policy because it's not related to the store table. And so this is a version of dimensional security that you can use. And it works. Now, the downside to this approach is, one, it doesn't hide the object names, which some people are concerned about. And the other downside to this is your security dimensions may or may not make sense as an aggregation breakpoint. So for example, my sales ag table has the exact same cardinality as my sales table. But so it's probably not a very good place to set an aggregation breakpoint. The only reason it's smaller is because I didn't copy all the columns over because we weren't using them all. So yeah, Alex, does that all make sense to you?
No, it's fine. I'm just learning as I go. I'm pulling up hopefully an example here, kind of leveraging DMVs. Biggest thing that's going to come back for me, because you're starting to talk about the complexity of that goes into this with various roles, this and that.
Yeah.
Do you have DAX Studio open as well? Yep, you've got it right here. If you can go to the DMVs for me.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a premium feature. So if you can type in roles in the search.
Roles. Discover Power BI roles.
Yeah, just type in roles. Yep.
Okay. So we need premium service for this.
Yep.
DMV.
And I'm going to be curious what it brings back. I believe it's just going to be a pretty simple return ID, lineage name, and name. So thinking like an auditor, they're like, well, what's in your model? Who has permissions to all of these? What is the combinations? Cross RLS, OLS, column table. I'm going to be more curious on what the documentation looks like on the back end.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see.
I'm going to get an example kind of running here on my machine. I'm going to get this built out real quick, but keep going down your road now. We'll switch over to mine whenever I get this published.
Okay, that sounds good. One of the things that I know I'm really interested in this DMV for in general is making sure that your role membership and your model membership are totally aligned. One, because it always sucks to tell someone, hey, you've got permission, and then they come back 2 seconds later and like, it doesn't work. And you're like, oh, right, I forgot to add you to a role. Also, we have to audit that stuff occasionally. So there's one more thing that I wanted to look at in terms of, hey, what sort of weird stuff works? What happens if we mix RLS and OLS? Now, the documentation here basically says don't do it. Let's bring this up. And it's sort of buried. But if we go to the tabular model documentation, so not the Power BI docs, but the analysis services docs, and come down to restrictions, it says here, row level security and object level security cannot be combined from different roles because it could introduce unintended access to secure data. An error is generated at query time for users who are members of such combination roles. So what I want to know is, at query time, does this only break when they're looking at a visual whose query triggers both roles? Or if they're looking at a visual, if they're in both an RLS and an OLS role, and the visual only triggers one of the roles, meaning that either the tables point to the RLS rule or the OLS rule, but there's no relationship between them, does that break? I tweeted this at Powers and he didn't respond the other day because it's a very obscure question. So we're going to try it. So that's what I set up this forecast table and the forecast dimension. So if we put an OLS rule on the forecast dimension, that shouldn't prevent us from using the RLS we were just looking at to look at sales. And so that's the first question. So let's go back to our view here, and we'll just continue on this view. There's one more thing that we started to do here, which I never went back to. So I'm going to set that up again. Instead of false, if we do filter to an employee, oh, right, it's just store employees equals 7 here. And let's just verify that. Now, yeah, so we see if we come in here and we look at employees, we'll see only sales for 7. But what we'll see is that the total sales for 7 because we have that measure switcher on, if we just look at employee sales, their total is 1.1 billion. But for the total sales isn't filtered because, again, that's not hitting our aggregation. That's hitting our aggregation table, which isn't affected by row level security. So this is a very common scenario for my org, which is we have salespeople and they have their quota, which only they should only be able to see their data. But, you know, every month or every quarter, the VP gets up in a meeting and says, hey, as an organization, we hit 99% of our target. And so the organization's overall performance is not secure. And so we might want to have some granularity that's visible to everybody, but other granularities that aren't. So that's this. From here, now let's finish. Can I get out of Zoom it? Maybe, there we go. Let's take and finish the OLS setup. So let's look in Tabular Editor.
I think Mark had a question here.
Oh yeah, Mark.
So just getting excited. So can we hide a measure used in table, say blocking the cost column and preventing just the cost and margin column from displaying for a user?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I come in here to my sales table and hit my, that's not it. Let's say I hit the sales prior year table, and then I can come into this somewhere. There should be, is there not? So the documentation definitely says that you can do measures, but I'm not seeing the RLS item for this here on the measures. So that's a good question. That I don't know if it's just we'd have to get into the model.bim and edit it, or if I'm just not seeing it. But there's definitely descriptions in the documentation of what happens if you hide a measure. And basically what it means is that the visual will break. Just like if you hit a column that's in the visual. If any of the objects are hidden, then it won't work. So let's do our role here. So I want to hide the forecast dimension, and let's just see. Yeah, so we've got none set on this table. Great. So in theory, if I were to take my visual here with employee sales, and I'm filtering sales by employee, and then I also wanted to look at sales forecast and filter that by category here in the same dimension. Let's do like this. Drill through. So we can see sales is repeated across categories because this category only affects forecast. And we can also, but we do see the forecast does vary by employee. Let's go back and look at our relationship diagram. So our forecast is affected by employee, but it's not affected by customer. So we will also try this with customer to see what happens there. So let's view as a role. Let's turn on our RLS employee and our forecast dimension and see what happens. Okay, so unable to view as roles because the combination is not supported. So let's try now. To come back to our RLS, and let's not do employees at all. Instead, let's do customer, and let's just do false here. And now let's try and combine those roles. And so, okay, so no, it doesn't work at all. It doesn't matter how your roles are combined. You can't have a person who is in both an OLS and an RLS role. So I think by and large, that probably means that you can't use them together. For me, it means I'm going to keep using the aggregation approach to managing breakpoints such that we can hide dimensions. It's a little memory inefficient, but you know, whatever.
That's what they've kind of talked about, right? Is like some of the RLS that exist today out in the wild. It's like a lot of lookup values, which can be very expensive. Where kind of with column, kind of just being a single scan, could be more performant. And then it's kind of these drawbacks here, though. All right, I've got a few things here on my screen. If you want to kind of cut over here,
let's take a look at your stuff for a bit.
Awesome. So we connected out to. I'm more curious on. Hey, documentation-wise, you know, what do I have? What can I do? So right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. So roles. So discover Power BI roles. This is through the XML endpoint. So we've published out the service. We have our roles now established. I've got a Florida sales reps, and I've just got one that I call hide table. So right off the bat, kind of this run statement. Cool. I have the name and I have the ID. Not a whole lot to derive from this one. So maybe this is like the top level of kind of that security with my model. So in this one, we're going to do our TM schema. So TM is tagged for model. We'll kind of continue to work through our list. Awesome. So I have the role ID, which we found previously, that can, you know, tie back up to who is a member of that. So I'm a part of the first one, which is the Florida folks, and then you're a part of the second one here, which is that table. Still not a whole lot that's giving us information of who's in there, what are they doing in there. So now we're kind of having to primary foreign key, continue going. So here, let's do kind of this one again. And I could have kind of done the second one. Yeah, so this one, model ID, model permissions, not telling me a whole lot yet.
I bet that column tells you whether it's got an OLS or RLS, maybe?
Not yet. So let's try TM schema. Let's do TM schema. Looking at some of the various items that we now have in our DMVs. And the one that's going to pop out to me here, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, I want to type in role. I want to type out these keywords that always kind of jump out to me. Not a whole lot, though. You know, I'm just not seeing a lot here. So the one that we're going to have to look for instead is going to be permissions. So column permissions. We'll kind of do that one here now. Still, just not a lot. What is going on here? Table permissions. So maybe table permissions. Kind of in our last one. So let's do permissions. Table permissions. Got table permissions.
So maybe you can reconstruct your OLS rules from this, but probably not your RLS rules.
There we go. There's my RLS. And then I have kind of this table level, which I was just didn't even really pass anything through. But I think right here is going to tell us.
Yeah.
The metadata permission. It sounds like we may have an echo.
We had an echo for a second when I turned our video back on, but I turned it off right away. So I think
Let us know in the chat.
Yeah.
We can we get the thumbs up. What I'm seeing. Oh, awesome. Thanks. So from what I'm seeing here is we can reconstruct this from an auditing perspective. Maybe it's PowerShell, maybe it's something else that's going to run against that XMLA kind of endpoint. Drop it in a database, kind of maintain that consistency. I'm going to have to do a little bit more digging here in terms of that metadata permission, because hopefully there's some type of classification that says 0. People are saying maybe has an echo, doesn't have. Seems like it's gone. But if it's not out in the docs, hopefully we can kind of meet with some of the folks internally to understand, hey, what does 0 mean? What is potentially 1? And then what is 2? But I think that this stuff is going to be really important, just because I'm starting to see it bubble up.
I think
now.
that's something we can figure out for with some testing. But yeah. So are all of these DMVs new to Power BI or just new to Mattering?
Yeah, so there are some that have been around, obviously, from analysis services, but one that's going to be more based on kind of Power Query and M, which is going to be your Power BI data sources. You run this. So right there kind of outputs some my M. So connecting out to a file, talking about the mashup container, obviously that massive binary that we love. So especially as people are starting to ask, well, where can I get all my Power Query scripts? All right, start typing in Power BI, see what DMVs exist. Obviously, this is kind of a newer one here with the roles that we started out with. So if we do that, then we have, all right, what roles are out there? If we were to jump over to the portal, we see those here, Florida sales reps, high table, kind of you and me. Just more interesting stuff, though.
Well.
Oh, so Theo had kind of asked, just not as kind of familiar on DMVs. So a DMV is going to be your dynamic management view. So especially with your data model itself, we don't want you going out and documenting that by hand. Stay away from all that if at all possible. So there'll be 2 different types of schemas. MD is going to be multi-dimensional, where TM is tabular model. So from here, what's in your model? What is it that you really want to kind of extract out? So maybe here we can do, I don't think I have any perspectives. Let's do tables, kind of a simpler one. Team schema tables. And I think we did this maybe, if not our first stream, but maybe 2 or 3, where we talked about, hey, there's a Power BI file that you can just run within your workspace that will go ahead and self-document.
Yeah, I've been
your
working
model
on that
for you.
Power BI file lately, doing some couple upgrades. Hopefully, we'll have the new. I'll have the new version ready, and we can talk about it.
Because this is gold right here. It's what's in your model. How is it being used? Do not export any of that by hand. Don't write any of that by hand. With an Excel file, just leverage these. If you have premium, and obviously now premium per user, you can have these running just against your Power BI data set up in the service. So that way, as incremental refreshes are happening, just self-documenting.
Yeah, it's very cool.
It's
One of the
awesome.
things we've been struggling with this Power BI file is trying to figure out how to get it to dynamically iterate through all the data sets in your workspace. Unfortunately, it seems like Power Query has a pretty hard limit on having quote-unquote dynamic data sources, which it doesn't like.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look back at that script because I want to tackle that again. I was trying to do with kind of a service principal approach, but I think that you were able to get kind of OAuth.
Well, it works fine in desktop, but when you try and publish it to the service, it says, oh, this is a dynamic data source, and it won't refresh. I think it can be done with a custom connector. Because the connector can reuse authentication credentials across data sets, but that's.
Let me take a look at that M again. I'll put my hands on the keyboard because I would love to solve that. And I had a few ideas on the last go of it, but I definitely want to keep us away from any custom connectors.
But definitely in theory you can. iterate through all the data sets and workspaces with the premium capacity and pull out the Vertipack analyzer information using the DMVs. We have basically recreated Vertipack analyzer as a Power BI model, which is very cool.
Maybe just throw it out to the chat. Are you leveraging your DMVs now, or is it just kind of run and gun? You're on to the next model, just from more of like a long-term documentation standpoint.
And the other interesting thing about DMVs, while they're answering, is many, if not all, of the GUIs that you use are actually populated by running the DMVs. And in fact, there are certain permissions in Power BI where someone can connect to the XMLA endpoint, but if they try to connect to the XMLA endpoint using DAX Studio, it will fail because DAX Studio populates the metadata tab using DMVs, and those permissions don't let them run those DMVs, which can be frustrating. But so yeah, basically, as you're browsing here, you're running the Discover tables, columns, models, DMVs in the back end. So
it's pretty genius on Darren's part. Has anyone started putting OLS kind of out into production yet, or kind of waiting just in kind of your own internal testing?
I can tell you that based on the test we just did, we will not be using OLS. We were very excited for it because we have some straight up OLS scenarios, but we also have other tables that are completely disconnected that we are using RLS for.
I think the big call out for me is that terrible warning to an end user where it's like something is broken. Yeah. It's like, well, it's not necessarily broken. It's just, you don't have permission. Why doesn't it tell that better story in that message? Because I'm starting to have a lot more conversations around kind of migrating SSAS or AAS into Power BI premium data sets.
So I think basically the story here is this is how it's always worked in analysis services. And Power BI has always responded unhelpfully when you had this in analysis services. And that's a big part of why they didn't implement it in Power BI datasets, is they wanted a better experience in desktop. But I think they finally said, screw it, let's ship the basic version for those folks that need it. And so we can say Power BI datasets can do everything analysis services datasets can do, which is true. It's just whatever version of tabular models you're using, it's not very good. And so, hopefully we'll get a fancier data masking thing in the future. But
I know some people were pretty excited with this matrix. This is what was originally out on the blog. I just stole it kind of row for row. I've been keeping it up to date, but kind of happy to get some of this just out to the community. Almost there in terms of full functional parity. And then obviously like aggregate tables, composite models, kind of there in Power BI's favor.
Yeah. But I mean, it really is exciting that we've really covered everything. I mean, I guess scale out isn't available yet, maybe?
Public preview in Gen 2. It now has that auto scale. Kind of the more pro dev stuff that I'm coming across is like read replicas and then backup.
So the other thing I've been thinking about scale out after the guy in the cube stream on Thursday, just to talk about a completely non sequitur. And one of the things that everybody has been saying is like, hey, if you're scaling out, you're wasting your money. I mean, it's a good stopgap, but like when you get that scale out alert, that tells you should go do some modeling work or upsize your capacity. But especially once you're on like a larger capacity, scaling out with just a single core, like if you've got a P2,
that won't help.
Your only option is to double your core count. And so maybe you do want to live auto-scaled with 1 or 2 cores for an extended period of time. That might be just fine. And much cheaper than buying 8 more cores or 16 more cores on a long-term basis.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would take 16 more cores to get you up to the P3. That's where it's going to be very interesting to see how people kind of leverage scale out. And, hopefully PPU, which everyone was like, why would I ever use it? It's like, well, it's great for development. If you have a large model and you don't want to eat it against your production capacity, totally makes sense to kind of move that route. I'm still more curious on kind of a blended architecture with setting like a minimum threshold of data you're willing to bring up into your Power BI data set, and then saying, all right, the rest we're going to transition to a paginated report. We're going to do that in a stream. I'm going to start leading the paginated report talk just because I've got my SSRS 2008 book here, just a short arm's length away. Unfortunately, the technology hasn't changed much, which I think we all heard from Chris Finley. He's like, I wish it was a better looking experience. It is what it is. It still has a place, but I think if you can do something, even without pre-ag tables, just say, we're cutting off the model at a monthly view. If you want to transition to a lower grain, it's going to be a paginated report down to that detail. Some really cool and interesting things. So I will be curious how people kind of approach it in the future.
Lamin asks a question about what are our thoughts on backup and restore? And I've got some thoughts. So sounds like you do too. My main thought is that I don't think you want to be like, I don't think it has a place in the cloud setup. Your tabular model should not hold data that you're not afraid to wipe away, right? If you've got some data in there that you really care about, it should not, like, you should be writing it to your data warehouse. And maybe you've got some sort of like complex calculation that gives you like a couple rows of output that you really care about. If so, you should use, the query abilities using the like PowerShell or the XML endpoint to read that data out and save it somewhere else as a table, not backing up the whole database. And if you're worried about, hey, I did a refresh and it broke it, and now I need to roll back, that could be a great use for deployment pipelines. If you don't set auto refresh on your test environment or set a different refresh cycle on your test environment, you can keep your test environment, 8 hours, 12 hours behind your production environment. And so if something goes wrong in production, you just push that test back up and you've got sort of a rollback experience. So I don't think we need the full-on backup and restore story. And I think like there are some scenarios where it's useful, but for every one person that does something interesting with it, I think 100 or 1,000 people are just going to waste their time and money storing backups that they're never going to use.
Yeah. Choosing my words correctly, right? Like mellow. Just literally having this kind of conversation with backups recently, where it was just, we're processing, but then we're starting to feed analysis services kind of models into other analysis services models. And I go, whoa, what? Yeah. Wait, what are we doing? Kind of building that BI house of cards that Matthew talked about, where people were exporting data from an analysis services to another analysis services to another. And it's like, well, should just get the data from the source. So yeah, I mean, I struggled with that conversation. And a lot of it was around that backup. Well, what if something breaks, earlier in the chain, and we need to roll back these other 5 that are downstream? And I go, oof, this is way past a proper architecture. The thing that I struggle with too is whenever they treat kind of the analysis services, Power BI in this example, as a data source. It's like, well, no, it's a destination for your data upstream. So maybe it's your data warehouse, maybe it's something else, but I don't know. Like for me, Power BI is that last mile. It's that looking glass window. We shouldn't be exporting data out of it in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts there, but
yeah, no, Kevin, I mean, totally. when analysts don't have the data sources they need, they find a way to do it whatever works. And so,
Yep.
As a data infrastructure person, like, I strongly believe that you need to provide your data to your analysts in multiple formats so that as their needs change, they can use the correct tool. Which is why my project is a mix of tabular models and Databricks, because it covers basically every analyst tool set that there is. Yeah, Kyle, I think that's what we were saying before, that scale out for a couple cores makes a lot of sense. But also, if you're spending $85 an hour for a core or two, maybe you should just offload a couple data sets to PPU and buy 3 or 4 PPU licenses or a dozen PPU licenses for way less than $85 an hour and get your capacity utilization down, that 10% or whatever you need. Yeah.
I see a lot of large models that are, quote unquote, out in dev. Obviously, before kind of PPU came to the story, it was, well, we have to do our dev and we have to live in prod. We have to do all these in the same capacity. Whew.
Yeah.
Difficult just to balance. I'm sure a lot of people probably either over purchased or, didn't have the time to go back and kind of clean up their models. So hopefully a lot of that opportunity has now been kind of lifted just with PPU. I know that you and me were excited because internal Microsoft, just kind of given out to kind of all the associates. So it's like, cool, now we can finally start using this stuff to the full breadth of its capability, without the cost implication.
So Kyle, what I'm saying is most folks use their P SKUs for multiple models. There's a few folks like me that only have 1 or 2 models on their PPU or on their P SKU, but almost everybody has at least 3 or 4 models. And so what I'm saying is find your least popular model and see if it was only used by 10 or 20 folks and move that to premium capacity. And you can get to, at $85 an hour, you can get to a lot of users at $10 a month or $20 a month before you hit the break-even point on either scaling up or buying another P1.
Yeah, I mean, what I commonly see is a single P1 that's running both self-service, BI, and organizational, kind of like an IT-led. And they're like, well, we can't tell who's the noisy neighbor. Everyone's just being thrown in the pool. Good models, bad models, kind of all combined and fighting for resources.
Yeah.
This is the time to kind of get rid of the SSBI node and just say, go use PPU. If you hit a headcount threshold where it justifies going to your own P1, that is now the time. If it's more of like a free viewer kind of unlocking. Other than that, I mean, near full functional parity with kind of premium. I know there are some limitations there in terms of like paginated report exports. Like, hey, we're not going to let you get 1 PPU to send the entire company. Like, you're not going to bypass licensing through that method.
Yeah, I mean, the PPU pricing and terms are very generous, but I think there are folks that are watching very carefully. If Chris Finland was too generous and if people abuse it, they might get changed.
Yeah.
Or the dreaded license auditors will have their new favorite thing to look at. Every customer, really what they should do is they should do what Microsoft did, which is just get every employee a PPU license and empower business units to buy their own A SKUs ad hoc. I mean, honestly, like, Alex, can you think of anything better than that?
I mean, it's insane. Especially if you're like an E5 customer where Power BI Pro is included. Does it make sense for you to have an entire team that's staffed up to manage multiple capacity nodes, or is it just like throw a few more bucks at the problem and
another $10
just
a
have
month.
PPU kind of self-govern itself?
So
yeah. But then, I mean, you're limited, like there's no multi-geo, so especially if you're a large organization, you still have to have kind of that premium footprint for like data residency. But I mean, for me, yeah, I would look at like cost benefit of being like, well, what if we just wiped out all of our premium and did PPU?
Yeah, I mean, I know Microsoft does have PPU for every employee, and I'm not. We have two A6s on our team, and which is a lot, and I'm not planning on getting rid of both of them. I think we might be able to get rid of one of them. I think we're going to run a test on that. But the other one, we're keeping it. We may downsize it a bit because right now we have the A6 because we need the memory. But in Gen 2, we may not need the memory as much. Although, based on the information Bogdan just shared, maybe we still do.
Yeah. I love Kyle's comments here. He says, hey, PPU, just awesome experience for a small business, maybe like 50 people. It kind of maybe takes them from that 5K, you know, huge dollar commitment down to, you know, only 1,000. Rich feature set for, I mean, selfishly, like, I'm excited because more people can now start doing more advanced things. There'll be better, more advanced content out there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And Kylo's totally right that like it really. Oh man, that should be better. Kyle is totally right that like this was designed for small businesses. If you have less than 250 seats or maybe even 500 seats that you need a license, like this is better than getting a SKU.
Yep.
But
there we go. We got thumbs up.
Yep.
I'm excited for more content. Alex D is excited just because hopefully custom spend internally. Hopefully everyone that is starting to look at PPU, you know, either from the comparison of kind of the AES or maybe some of the features that don't exist still, dev test, get PPU, try it out. Hopefully you'll just be really excited with, you know, all the capabilities that are unlocked. OLS, I think you and me, Alex, maybe kind of 50-50 in terms of doing anything like in production just yet.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't need RLS, it's really good. But if you do need RLS, you can fake OLS and have a better user experience.
Yeah.
You will pay a little bit of a performance hit, so like it's worth considering the options. But the performance hit that you get from having RLS might be fixed by having the aggregates that you have to create to do it. It sort of depends on where your OLS RLS boundary is, or your like what's the granularity of the dimension you're hiding. So
let's say next stream we'll do paginated. Does that work for you, Alex D?
We can
Hopefully
absolutely
be
do
excited for that.
Paginated reports. We'd also love to hear if there are topics you guys wanted to hear about. Thanks everybody for hanging out. It's been a fun conversation.
Well, let us know over on Twitter. Let us know in the chat kind of what you would be excited to see. I mean, obviously some of the data flows, enhanced compute engine. We can maybe start diving into that a little bit more too.
Yeah. And you know, I don't know if they've announced dates yet, but
for what?
The data summit. I'm trying to remember what they call it these days. Imbas will be on us before we know it. And you know, I was hanging out with Alex's friend Charles the other day, and oh man, you guys are going to be so excited for some of the stuff that you're going to hear about at Imbas.
Well, I think that's April, so it's just like more and more virtual conferences. Hopefully we can all get back in person at some point. But
well, I miss the in-person stuff, but it's nice that everybody gets to go to every virtual conference.
Oh, I agree. I love just that we can all actually attend. I mean, even as Microsoft employees, we can't attend some of these conferences because the tickets are either so limited or whatever else. So
yeah.
It's nice. I just would like an in-person something at some point.
Well, I'd like to meet some of you guys.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and
Yeah.
wrap up. Thank you, everyone, as always, for your time. Alex D, close us out.
Yeah. Goodbye, everybody.